Earlier, I talked about the Patriotic Education curriculum instituted in China after 1991, and how it sprouted a generation of fervent Chinese nationalists. But China is not alone in its cultivation of an individual national identity. The same effect can be seen across the strait in Taiwan. Here, I want to talk about Taiwan's own version of patriotic education. The same educational indoctrination and historical narratives that work to make a generation of Chinese nationalists have also been applied towards making a generation of Taiwanese nationalists. Now, before I move forward, I know this is a controversial topic. I know there are many reasons for increased nationalistic feelings across the world. I know you will want to yell at me. Okay. But the work done here was interesting to me, and so I wanted to share this tiny bit with you today. And so be civil, be kind, and don't yell at me. Otherwise, I will take pleasure, extreme pleasure, in banning you. Alright, let's get to it. Before Taiwanese democratization, Taiwanese were taught a historical curriculum that was generally China-centered, with no particular emphasis on Taiwan itself. The ruling Kuomintang regime's officially stated policy was gearing the population towards taking back the mainland. So, for example, you had to learn about Chinese historical events and memorize things like the names of the various Chinese provinces across the strait. Whenever Taiwan did come into the picture, the island was positioned as a model province, showcasing the superiority of the Kuomintang's model of governance. The narrative went something like this. In the past, foreign scum invaders invaded and took advantage of the Taiwanese, but the glorious Chinese people led by the Kuomintang party took back the island after a great struggle. Over the years, the party painstakingly developed the island's economy and society into a shining light of civilization as compared to the horrible hell that's on the mainland because of the CCP, blah 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 blah. After the party's Taiwanization and the island's democratization, the government sought to change the direction of the people of Taiwan. That includes cultivating a Taiwanese identity amongst the growing young generation. This naturally sparked a titanic controversy centered on a series of textbooks called Knowing Taiwan. Knowing Taiwan is the name given to a series of standardized textbooks introduced in 1997. For the first time, junior high school kids will be assigned to learn from something exclusively about Taiwan Island, its history, geography, and society, as opposed to something about China. Now, outsiders watching right now might think, well, what's the big deal with that? It makes sense that you would learn about where you are living in. The issue comes out to be in the details. Reading closely, these textbooks turned out not to be your average Chinese history textbook. They take a subtle but significant shift from the previously taught narratives. The books were written with the intention of cultivating Taiwanese nationalism, setting Taiwan apart from China. Firstly, the books do not refer to the people of Taiwan as being members of the Chinese nation. Instead, in a chapter titled We Are All Taiwanese, the textbook presents Taiwan as a multicultural society made of four large ethnic groups: the Hokkien, the Hakka, the mainlanders, and the Aboriginal people. The textbook goes on to say that despite being a diverse agglomeration of peoples, the nation is unified under a set of abstract nationalist principles. In this way, Taiwan carries on the principles of the Republic of China, which sought racial harmony between the Manchu ethnic minority and the Han ethnic majority, as well as the principles practiced, theoretically, in the United States. Secondly, the history of Taiwan is chronicled in much greater specificity. This paradigm is something not totally unfamiliar to us in the United States, with its three spheres of focus. In U.S. high schools, we study U.S. history, U.S. state history, California, Alaska, etc., and international history. Modern historical curriculums that is taught in Taiwanese schools today follow the same track: Chinese history, foreigner history, and now added Taiwanese history. This last part has been subject to exceptional controversy. The book's historical narrative spans 400 years, starting with the Dutch colonization, and continues through the island's rule under the Ming, Qing, and Japanese regimes. The textbook's first edition ends with the 1996 democratic election. The Chinese perspective is downplayed in these cases, replaced with a Taiwanese one. This new narrative paints the Taiwanese people as victims of a tragic history at the hands of various occupations from foreign regimes, and it would not be until the present day that they could finally be, quote-unquote, masters of their own home with the coming of democratization. Here are a few examples of the kind of the specific deletions and changes and what they mean. 1. The notable deletion of Sun Yat-sen's honorific as Father of the Nation. 2. The 50 years Taiwan existed as a Japanese colony is referred to as a period of Japanese rule rather than as an occupation. It downplays much of the brutality and second-tier treatment suffered by the Taiwanese and emphasizes the economic and social benefits that the colonization offered to the people. This change got a lot of airtime in the news. 3rd, Japan's loss in World War II forced it to cede Taiwan Island to the Republic of China. This event is no longer referred to in textbooks as the glorious retrocession like it had been once in previous history textbooks. And 4, the Republic of China is repeatedly referred to in the text as the ROC on Taiwan, emphasizing the regime's temporary status occupying the island. Over the years after the introduction of knowing Taiwan, the textbooks show an increase in detachment from China. They present a Taiwan that is not explicitly quote-unquote Chinese, meaning that you get more Taiwanese content and less Chinese ones. So there's a lot more changes than the 4 I've mentioned in the textbook, but those are just a few examples. The changes, of course, do not represent a complete separation. Such a thing is not practical. After all, the vast majority of Taiwanese people are ethnically Han, speak the Chinese language, and practice Chinese traditions. And the books acknowledge this, by the way. This is in no ways a blaring call for total separation and independence. But, as you may know, things are right now a bit complicated between the island and the mainland. As the generations turned over, both political regimes that realized that they needed to keep up with the times in order to stay relevant. For a long time, the Kuomintang justified its mandate of rule over the island through its claim on the mainland. As the 90s approached, such a claim could no longer be justified. So, just as the Chinese Communist Party shifted its mandate to power from achieving communism on China to glorifying the Chinese nation, such did the Kuomintang shift its mandate from the idea of we are Chinese, we must reclaim the motherland, to glorifying the Taiwan nation. And it is here when we must address the presence of politics. One might think to pin blame for this shift in focus on the DPP president Chen Shui-bian. Indeed, the books were first rolled out during his presidency, but they weren't drafted up back then. I think the interesting thing about the textbooks is that they more reflect the national views espoused by the late President Lee Teng-hui, who belonged to the Kuomintang rather than the independence-minded DPP. Several of the examples I previously mentioned remain valid within the framework of the ROC Constitution. And then there are the book's strangely favorable assessment of the Japanese occupation, a fondness the former president was well known for. Of course, the writers of the textbooks rejected this indoctrination and propaganda angle, stating simply that the people of Taiwan should learn about their own location. The result of this new education curriculum, though, would be clear. A generation of people with greater awareness of Taiwan as a distinct identity of its own. All right, everyone. Be nice in the comments. Have a good night.